Today, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released their annual population update. Over the past financial year, so that's 2016-17, 539,000 people arrived as migrants to this country. This was the highest number of overseas migrants on record ever in Australia's history.
We are truly an immigration nation. We are an immigration nation.
Now you can understand why people sitting in traffic congestion are angry.
Cities are becoming denser. We're living closer together. Density is not the problem, density is the solution. Density is not the problem, density is the solution.
Why young families who can't get onto the housing ladder are angry.
House price growth almost perfectly tracks immigration. Sydney and Melbourne had a massive population boom over the past 5 years, and their property prices have gone through the roof. The other nations haven't had the big immigration intake, their property prices have stagnated or fallen.
It's true too. And why wage growth has remained so flat.
If you measure economic growth the correct way, which is per person, there is absolutely no evidence to show that immigration raises per person wealth.
Malcolm Turnbull is putting at risk our social cohesion.
One of our greatest assets is our diverse multicultural society. There are in Australia over 600,000 people who speak Chinese at home as their primary language at home. So China is part of Australia. I mean, Islam is an ancient religion of great scholarship. I mean, for heaven's sake.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
I think our greatest strength as a nation is our diversity.
You renamed the Australian Department of Immigration and Multicultural Affairs the Department of Immigration and Citizenship.
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
Because I think the whole idea of immigration is to make citizens, not to build a federation of cultures within one nation. Once you're here or there, you become one.
Our diversity and the fact that we have so many cultural backgrounds is one of our greatest strengths.
I think multiculturalism is a very confused credo.
One of our greatest assets is our diverse multicultural society.
We ought to aim at having a homogeneous population.
I mean, in this city in Sydney, where we're sitting today, a third of the people in this city were not born in Australia. Do you know we have a much higher percentage of our population born outside of Australia than there are Americans born outside of America?
Cities are important places. That's a great passion of mine. So you know, having the goal of being a global citizen is I think a goal that's informed my life.
There's an agreement in the works at the moment between a number of UN member nations, including Australia, which would essentially soften our immigration laws. It's called the Global Compact for Migration. The text of the agreement encourages nations to adopt pro-migration policies. It also encourages countries to view freedom of movement more favourably.
Inevitably, this document would be used to shame countries like us for policies that actually work and exploited by human rights lawyers to get illegal migrants the residency outcomes they want, more often than not based on an economic desire for a better life than true refugee status.
There are these requirements in this document to review and revise laws. One of them goes to the whole idea of not using detention as a deterrent.
We'll be compelled by the United Nations to roll out the welcome map to all comers who make it here.
Who authorised Australia's co-drafting role? And why haven't we said we won't sign up to it in any form?
There was no discussion of this in Parliament. I went through the Hansard and there's no discussion by any Cabinet Minister of this compact or this agreement.
How has this gone this far down the track before we are told anything? And a Liberal government? Is there some conspiracy going on here that we're kept in the dark? This is treachery. Who in the government is behind this? Who in the Liberal Party thought this was a good idea? Whoever they aren't working for Australia. So what's the agenda here?
What are they trying to hide?
Malcolm Turnbull, at his heart, and Julie Bishop too, are globalists. They want Australia to be part of this global community where, you know, we're lectured by the pious bureaucrats at the UN, and we change our laws accordingly. I think the Australian people don't want that.
The final draft, which is the draft that will be essentially ticked off at a conference in December.
We'd be nuts to take advice from the United Nations on anything, let alone border security.
I really think Australians are sick of being lectured to by the United Nations.
Australia is one of only about 27 countries in the world that resettles refugees. 70-odd nation states who are signatory to the Refugee Convention. Only 27 of them actually take people and resettle them in country and give them a permanent home. We are one of that 27. So we should not cop rubbish from unelected bureaucrats in Geneva who want to make us ashamed about our outstanding record on human rights. Australia is a beacon of human rights, and the idea that we're going to be lectured and hectored by these sorts of pretenders, I think, is outrageous. We should pull out of the whole thing and say, stuff you all.
They're requiring, not proposing, requiring governments that sign up to this to retrain, re-educate journalists, sensitise them.
Even in the private media, not just state, not just the ABC.
All media. And it's not just the media. There's also a provision for retraining for judges and consular officials as well. It's astounding. The risk to Australian sovereignty, and not just Australian sovereignty, the sovereignty of other countries, was simply ignored. It was just not taken on board. And there's large slabs of this that are just completely unacceptable. Manipulating the media is not part of the role of government in this country.
What do you personally think of the idea, as you say, it's a hardline policy of sending people to an island, to Manus Island?
Well, it is a very cruel policy. All of the policies to deal with the people smuggling, problem are, to some extent, cruel. Some are crueler than others.
As opposition leader, are you calling for the reintroduction or the reinstatement of temporary protection visas?
What I'm calling for, Fran, firstly, is for the government to tell us the facts. We need to know...
No, that's a separate thing. We'll get to that.
It seems Tony Abbott, with his hawkish stance, introducing the military to respond to unauthorised immigration.
We have harsh measures, Stephen. Harsh measures. Some would say they're cruel measures.
The Turnbull government is under huge pressure to cut immigration. So last week, the government announced, yes, it had finally listened and had cut the permanent immigration intake by 21,000 people a year.
So that's actually the lowest it's been in 10 years.
But is the impression you were invited to have actually right? Has the government truly cut immigration, or did it just trick you?
There is a little bit of fiddling going on here. At the same time as the permanent migrant intake fell by 21,000, the government's actually increased so-called bridging visas by 40,000.
So the government's saying, we've cut 20,000, look over here, meanwhile over there there's an extra 40,000. They're not serious.
Our immigration program is overwhelmingly skills-based, so it is driven by the demands in our economy. And so we're very focused on making sure that we don't bring in skills from overseas unless there really is a skills shortage in Australia.
What's happened with the skill program is that over the past 6 years, it's been radically changed. 6 years ago, one of the criteria was that you had to have an occupation that was in short supply in Australia. That rule has now been abolished. There is no requirement anymore that you have to have scarce skills to be selected in the skilled migration program.